Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to an update as to what's been happening in the used car market 2025, because I've been provided some rather interesting information via Motors and Cazoo. Thank you very much for the information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through what's happened in 2025, because we've had a massive headline that might sound really boring, but actually when you break it down is really interesting. So bear with me on this one. Let's get a quick rewind, and not back to 2025, but back to 2019. So 2019 was a time when the used car market, for want of a better word, and it never feels right for this industry, was normal. So used car prices weren't going mad, dealers knew what they were doing, there was market confidence, everybody knew where they were at. Someone would come in and negotiate on the car, but they'd do it like an adult because they weren't upset with what happened with used car prices. People weren't going on Auto Trader and just checking to see whether or not their Ford Fiesta had gained £6,000 for no reason overnight. 2019 was quite truly a wonderful time. And then 2020 happened, and it was a seismic shift in the market. We all know what happened in 2020. It was, of course, COVID, and as a result of which, everything went a little bit crazy, to say the least. Some used car prices increased by 30 to 40%. I'm going to talk you through a quick timeline of events of what happened between 2020 to 2025, because it will give some sort of context as to what's happened in 2025 and why the most boring headline you can think of is actually, from a car dealer and a consumer's point of view, one of the most exciting things that we could be seeing in what has been a somewhat disruptive and dynamic situation that we've all been facing over the last few years. So let's just have a quick look as to what's happened over 2020 to 2025. So if we use 2019 as a baseline, and then we can work out from there, used car prices acted normally. Depreciation curves were normal. Dealers knew how to stock and where to stock and how to buy the stock, and nobody expected cars to be an investment as such. Then 2020 came, and obviously we had the massive shock with lockdown. Lockdowns halted new car production, and demand didn't vanish, it just shifted. Public transport avoidance started pushing people into used cars, and used cars prices rose when they should have fallen. So 2021 was the absolute madness year, and that was mainly down to the fact that we'd had the shock of COVID, but also you couldn't get hold of a semiconductor to build a car. So new car waiting lists were around 12 to 18 months. It meant that second-hand cars or used cars weren't a second choice, they were your only choice, and it created an absolute price surge, with some cars increasing 30 to 40% in value, and prices absolutely surged. It was unsustainable, but absolutely unstoppable. 2022 came denial. We're all guilty of this one. Prices stayed high because supply is still lagging, dealers were fearing on missing out, and buyers had no alternatives. So 2022 was one of those years where the price had gone up but nothing else really happened. 2023 we saw a proper plateau. So prices stopped rising, nobody trusted the pause, buyers waited, dealers hesitated, and in 2024 we finally saw somewhat of a correction in the used car market. EV supplies dropped sharply, hybrids softened, and petrols stabilised. It wasn't a crash, it was a recalibration. And that brings us on to what's happened in 2025, where we have seen, finally, some form of stability. And that's massive news. But there's also buyer confidence and buyer change in the background there. I'm going to talk you through that. Let's have a look at the top cars that were searched for in 2025. Top 5 models. So running from 5th place up to 1st place, and this is genuinely where it gets interesting. At the bottom of the chart, you've got the Vauxhall Corsa. Moving up, you then with the BMW 3 Series, followed by the Ford Focus, and then crucially, the Ford Fiesta, and then the Volkswagen Golf. Now, historically, for years and years, the Ford Fiesta has always been the most searched for car in the used market. It could just be because Ford is a brand that is very much embedded into the UK psyche. It could just be because they made more cars than anybody else. But for whatever the reason, the Fiesta has always been the benchmark. Now, the Volkswagen Golf, knocking the Fiesta off the top spot might sound like it's not massive news, but it really is big news. And there are a couple of different reasons for that. So first of all, you would argue that the Golf knocking the Fiesta off the top spot is because the Ford Fiesta has stopped production. And there is an argument for that. because when a car stops production, it means that people start thinking about the future for that car and that brand. They're thinking about, can I get parts for it? What if it breaks down? They've got a bit of a situation with the EcoBoom engines in a Ford as well. So there's lots of different reasons why people might get a little bit unsure of the fact that they've stopped new production and therefore they're not even looking for the used cars anymore. So that's one thing. But the big thing in this, I think people are starting to look at value for money. So we have had an economy that has been worrying us for a long time, to say the least. And people are starting to look at what is best value for money now. This is music to my ears, by the way, as a used car dealer, especially when I deal with sports performance, prestige, that sort of stuff of a particular age and mileage. Because I genuinely think that people are looking at this and going, well, a Volkswagen Golf is not that much more than a Ford Fiesta. It also gives me the same reliability. I've still got the same brand awareness. I still trust them. I've forgotten about the fact that they lied about the miles to the gallon. We understand that all cars will do a similar miles to the gallon of a similar size and a similar engine, etc. So I'm not bothered about that anymore. But what can I get for my money? What is going to give me value? And I think that's why the Golf has pipped the Fiesta at the top of this list. Now, when you actually start to look at the brands, Ford has still very much dominated the brand side of things, but there's been a seismic shift on that as well. And it's subtle, but when you look at it, it speaks volumes. So when we look at the top 5 brands that have been searched for in used cars, Ford is number 1, has been for years, followed by Volkswagen, followed by BMW, then Audi, and finally at the bottom, in the top 5, Mercedes-Benz. Now that is the key thing that I think is important to look at here, because it always, historically, was Vauxhall. That was kind of the number 5 slot, or it might be number 4 or whatever, but it was always making top 5. And what that is telling me, and I think telling a lot of people, is again, people are looking for value for money. They're not necessarily looking to buy a Bentley, but they're going, well, what can I get for a little bit more money that is going to give me what I think is a lot more car and still give me sort of reliability, a brand I know, a brand I trust, and I know I'm going to be okay with a second-hand Mercedes-Benz. This is a lot about the UK market. So let's have a quick look at EVs as well, because this is really important what's happened on the EV market in the last 12 months. So unsurprisingly, EVs have not dominated the headlines in 2025, certainly not for good reasons. And when you look at the top cars that have been searched for, the Tesla Model 3 again sits at number 1, which accrues over 8% of EV used car searches. Behind it is the Nissan Leaf, followed by the Jaguar I-Pace. So there's no sort of massive trend there or anything to be conscious about. There's no drama, there's no upheaval. But when you look lower down the list, what I noticed is that the Model Y has jumped from 7th place to 4th place. And that tells us something important. And again, it links with this value for money. EV buyers aren't just looking at this as new technology anymore. They want to know, how much space have I got? Is it practical? What's the real world usability like? It's no longer a novelty, it's more of a user experience. So the Renault Zoe has dropped right down the list, and some would argue that's a cheap EV experiment, because people are no longer saying, oh, I want to try an EV out, is it good? They're saying, well, no, actually, is it usable? Can I live with it? Can I charge it? Is it practical? Can I do my daily commute and not end up struggling to get charge? Will it replace my petrol car, or is it just going to complicate my life? So now EVs are no longer a new modern tech. People are genuinely looking at them as a used car, which makes a massive difference. Now, obviously, there's been a drop in values of EVs over the last 12 months. Lots of different reasons for that. Obviously, Rachel Reeves has added an additional tax on, another levy to squeeze money out of the general public. That's obviously affected prices, but also the consumer mindset has started to change. We are concerned about the cost of electricity, the replacement costs of batteries, the reliability of EVs. Will they do the same mileage in the winter? All the horror stories are starting to come to fruition about EV ownership and EV buying, and of course, residual values. So when you look at the trends of EVs, petrols, hybrids and diesels over the last 12 months, only 1 out of those 4 has actually increased ever so slightly in value, and that is petrol cars. And there's an argument that there's a good reason for that. The infrastructure is there, we know it, we trust it, we know the reliability of a petrol car. There are no worries about the government getting involved and changing tax regimes on them to a certain extent. It's something that we are familiar with and we are used to. So EVs have dropped, hybrids have dropped, and diesels have dropped. And I think there's good reason for all of those 3. So diesel, obviously, emission zones, Euro 6, all that sort of stuff. You'd kind of expect to see that, but it didn't drop a huge amount. They have dropped though. But when you look at the prices of EVs and hybrids, EVs have dropped the most, which is telling us that people aren't interested in them anymore, which is great news from a petrol head's point of view when you're looking at how my business might run in the future. Now, what's also interesting is when you look at dealerships and you look at how many cars they've been stocking, how long it's been taking cars to sell, and when you're looking at this, you're looking at a general consensus across the market. So you're not picking out an individual dealer and kind of going him versus him or her versus her. You're looking at the industry as a whole. So apparently, it's not necessarily the case here, but the average time it took to sell a used car in a dealership throughout 2025, on average across each month, is 31 days, which is normal. So back in 2020 during COVID, you were literally putting cars online. It was 24 to 48 hours. And if the phone hadn't rang, you'd be checking to make sure it was actually advertised. Then we've had times sort of the back end of 2024 and 2023 where prices were coming right off and you'd have a car sat in for 2 or 3 months. It wasn't abnormal. But now for them to say that the average time is 30 to 31 days is actually quite punchy as a number to look at, because it again is showing this sort of market stability that we've been waiting for the last 5 years. People have been saying, are used cars going to crash? I've always said I don't think they will, but we'll see a correction. We have indeed seen that correction. Now it looks like we are starting to see that stability. This is really powerful news. Now, when you look at the number of units that have been stocked, franchises on average have increased their stock slightly. And then when you look at independent dealers like myself, that average has stayed round about the same, fairly consistent throughout 2025, which again is showing that dealerships and franchises, etc., are starting to get to a point where they're getting a handle on what they need and how it's going to work. Now, there's obviously been massive changes in how we buy our stock. That's been very difficult ever since COVID, and there's also been massive changes as to how we are governed as to how we can sell our stock. And I'm not going to have a rant that I normally would do about certain platforms where you sell your car, but there's obviously been big news about that side of things as well. So it is still difficult in used car sales. There's no two ways about it. Margins are tighter, running costs are a lot higher, but there does appear to feel that there's a little bit of stability now across the used car market. So 2025 is not going to be the year that is going to be remembered for drama in the used car market. It's indeed going to be the year that is remembered for stability. People stop panicking, people stop speculating, and people have started to behave more rationally, most of them. The Golf beating the Fiesta isn't a big nostalgic story, but it is highlighting that buyers are starting to look at value for money rather than the cheapest possible option, which totally contradicts the trend that we are all skint. I mean, we are all skint. I can verify this for sure. But it's really interesting, isn't it? So I know that might not seem like big news, but I think it says a huge amount as to what is going on in not only the economy, but EVs, but also consumer confidence and the way in which we are buying our cars moving forward. I genuinely think, and I will stand on this, that 2026 is going to be a good year. I don't think it's going to be our most profitable year because we are fighting the fights that we've been fighting for the last couple of years, which is the rising costs of absolutely everything and the smaller margins in absolutely everything. So that is of course always going to be an issue for us, and the way that we find our stock's always going to be difficult, same with every other dealer in the land. But I do feel like we've finally got to a position where we are a little bit more stable. However, sadly, I do still think we're going to see a lot of dealerships closing this year. And that all boils down to exactly what I've just said. The margins are tight, the costs are higher. So whilst you might have this sort of stability that we've all been hoping and waiting for, I think it might be somewhat a little too late. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see more dealers leaving the market. Now, what does that mean for me? If I can hold on, it means good news. I know that sounds awful, and I genuinely don't want dealers to collapse. I am one, but the more dealers that leave the market, the more cars there are for me to buy and sell, and the less consumers are going elsewhere and coming to me. And I think a lot of dealers are of this mindset at the moment, which is if you can hang on and weather the storm, which now at least seems to be less choppy waters, albeit still a difficult storm to navigate, I do think the future is indeed bright. There you go. That's my recap of 2025. Boring but really interesting, and I hope that you found that useful and helpful. And if you've not subscribed, please do. If you've got any comments as to what you think will happen in 2026, am I wrong? Is there a seismic shift that I have missed? Or are we now going to see a little bit of stability and things looking good moving forward? I'm hoping for the latter, but then seismic shifts equals drama equals content. So I'm happy either way. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.